Now, I'm not going to do a show of hands because it might reveal your age, but some of you may remember the name Chuck Colson. Yes, I'm seeing a few older people going, oh, yeah. He was one of Nixon's kind of henchmen in Watergate, right? And obviously got in a lot of trouble for all of that. You can Google it later if you would like. But then in 1973, he actually professed faith in Jesus. And I don't know those of y'all who were alive during that, but the reception was very mixed, right? Some people were like, oh, that's amazing. God can save somebody. I mean, that like twisted and manipulative and involved in that was like the political evil of the day. God can save somebody from Washington, D.C.? Wow. You know? Other people were like, he's just doing that to get less time on a sentence. Now, 50 years from now, we kind of seen the way that the Lord's used the rest of his life and his ministry to actually prove that. But, I think that's a normal thing a lot when people in the public eye, especially those who are controversial figures. I mean, as a millennial, I'm like, we got Justin Bieber and Kanye West were two people that were like, hey, we're Christians now. And I mean, all the Christians, unless you grew up on their music and you just love them, all the Christians were like, well, let's wait this one out and see how it goes. Right? Now, I wasn't a wrestling fan, but I just watched that Hulk Hogan documentary, and near the end of his life, he gets saved, and I'm like, whoa, okay, that turned around. And I'm living in this tension of like, I want to be really hopeful, but also like, there's skepticism, right? I get the doubts. It makes sense. I mean, and I don't know who your person is, whether it's a celebrity or somebody you know personally, but it's not hard for many of us to think, okay, if God were to save them, what would be my response? Would it just be like, oh, finally, whew? Or is it like, we'll wait this one out. We'll see how it goes. I think that's the kind of tension that we see in this passage. All right, I'm going to kind of break it up into two chunks. Probably going to spend a lot more time on the front half. And so if you're like, Michael, come on, man, lunch is coming up. You're not even to the second half of I'm doing that on purpose. I just want to walk through this passage, starting with who is Saul, right? Who is Saul? Now, Saul is the Hebrew name for Paul, which is the Greek name. So many of us know the Apostle Paul, who wrote 13 letters of the New Testament. But from what we know so far in our study of Acts, Saul's only come up once before at the end of chapter 7, beginning of chapter 8, when Stephen was killed. And it says, if you want to just flip a page back, it says that when everyone was going to stone Stephen, the witnesses laid down their garments at the feet of a young man named Saul. So he seemed to be some kind of like ringleader. And then after Stephen died, in chapter 8, verse 1, it says, and Saul approved his execution. Now, if you remember, when I was preaching through that, what is Stephen's like final prayer? Right before Lord receive my spirit, he says, God, hold this against them. What we see is actually the answer to that prayer here in chapter 9. And so when we see here, like what Luke says, Saul still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, you're like, okay, this is a way of life for Saul. This is not just something he did once. His way of life is he's breathing, and actually the verb that's used there is the same verb. It's breathing in, kind of like a wild beast that's like snorting before it's about to go make an attack on its prey. I'm not going to do it because you don't want to hear that coming out of my mouth, but you can try it on your way home. But it's that breathing in, that snorting, and that's how Luke describes what Paul is doing then. He's inhaling threats and murders of the Christians, or those who follow the way, which is used 5 other times in Acts describing Christianity. Now, Paul retells this story 2 other times in the book of Acts. And I want to read for you. If you want, you can flip over to Acts 26. I'm just going to read 3 verses from then. And this is what Paul says about his state before the road to Damascus. All right, Acts 26, verses 9 to 11. Paul says, I myself was convinced that I ought to do many things in opposing the name of Jesus of Nazareth. And I did so in Jerusalem. I not only locked up many of the saints in prison after receiving authority from the chief priests, but when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. And I punished them often in all the synagogues and tried to make them blaspheme. And in my raging fury against them, I persecuted them even to foreign cities. I mean, that's just Paul saying, this is my story before I met Jesus on that road. And look what he does in the end of verse 1 to verse 2 of Acts 9. It says he went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogue at Damascus, so that if he found in any belonging to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. So basically, he went to the high priest and said, hey, can I go to Damascus? Now, Damascus had a ton of Jews there, and many of them, as the word is spreading, many of them are believing. And when I say a ton of Jews, shortly after this, or around this time, the Emperor Nero was recorded to, at one time, he killed 10,000 Jews in Damascus. Okay, so this is a very big religious population, and Paul's like, that's my next target. So he goes to the high priest to say, hey, can I go there? The high priest, notice this, the high priest doesn't come to him and go, hey, Paul, I got a new assignment for you. Those Christians, we really got to stamp it out. Paul is seeking this out. Okay, Paul is going out of his way, and if you realize how far this is, it's 150 miles. All right, that's like past Houston from here. And they did not have the combustion engine yet, so he had to walk it. It would take about a week to make this journey. And Paul's like, a week? Man, I travel a month to do this. Like, that's the type of person that Paul is here. I mean, he was a brutally bloodthirsty man. He was a manhunter. And when he later describes this, if you keep reading in chapter 26, he says that when Jesus confronted him, Jesus says, like, I have been, like, gracious, and I've been calling you, and you've been like an ox kicking against the goads. Now, if you're like, what? There's an ox and a goad. What is a goad? A goad is a stick that you would use to poke ox to get them going in the right direction, right? Ranchers or farmers or shepherds, they would use goads to basically prod them and move them along where they want to go. And sometimes big old ox are like, why are you poking me back there? Stop it. And they try to kick, but that doesn't do anything, right? The shepherd's going to have his way. And that's what Jesus actually says to Paul in this conversation. It's like, you are trying to just kick at the stick. It's so futile. Like, you're persecuting and kicking against the goads, trying to push away all these thoughts. Meanwhile, you are just oppressed by your guilt, and you're trying to silence your conscience by just giving yourself further and further and further to this endeavor of extinguishing these Christians that's spreading like wildfire. So I say all this to say this important context so that we know who it is that's about to get saved. I.e., God can save anyone. Anyone. And also that context kind of sets up what happens next. So go to verse 3. That man, that bloodthirsty manhunter who's got a list of names, he sees a light from heaven. It's like lightning. It just absolutely makes him just crumble and fall to the ground. Now, this is a man who grew up in the old, like around the Old Testament. His teacher was Gamaliel, which some people say was the greatest Old Testament scholar in the last 400 years. I mean, think about that. That's Paul going to study under the most brilliant mind. Many scholars said that Paul probably had the entire Old Testament committed to memory by his bar mitzvah when he turned 13. I mean, this is a man who knew God's word. And so he knows when God shows up, You can read Daniel. You can read Ezekiel. You can read Isaiah. You can even go to the New Testament when this happens in Matthew 1. When God shows up, the response is to fall on your face, to fall on the ground. Now, but usually there's a word of comfort. You read all those stories and it's fear not, right? Like the angels that they show up and the shepherds are in the field and they are just terrified. And what does it say? Fear not, I bring you good news of great joy. Saul gets none of that here. There is no word of comfort, which means he is in trouble. He's in big trouble. Now, this might not be surprising to us because we're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, we know the rest of Saul/Paul's story. But this moment of seeing Jesus had to have absolutely been shocking and terrifying, especially when he comes face to face with his sin. Because we know this from Philippians 3. He says, like he's kind of going against these people that are saying, oh, well, it's, like Paul, who is this guy? And Paul's like, look, if I wanted to boast in the flesh, I have the best resume of all of us here. I mean, that's what he says. He says, though I myself have reason for confidence in the flesh, if anyone else thinks that I have more. I was circumcised on the 8th day. I was of the people of Israel. I was the tribe of Benjamin. Those are the faithful ones in the south that hung around a lot longer. A Hebrew of Hebrews. As to the law, I was a Pharisee. As to zeal, I was a persecutor of the church. As to righteousness under the law, blameless. I mean, this was the model churchgoer. He was a good dude who knew the word and actually followed the word. And so, for Paul, I mean, all of the Old Testament, the Old Covenant, right? It's all like God's relationship with Israel, with his people. And what he realizes is that if Jesus, and we know this on this side of the cross, if Jesus fulfilled all of that, it's kind of like, what do you do then when you build your entire life on the Old Covenant? You spent your whole life putting your money into a stock that now is obsolete. It's done. I mean, all these fundamental structures, the law, the priesthood, the temple, what Paul built his whole life on, now that they've been fulfilled, they've been brought to an end, to their intended end and completion in Jesus. I mean, think about it. Like the Abrahamic covenant, which is God's promise to Abraham that I'll give you a covenant, you will be a great nation, kings will come from you, you will be a blessing to the world. Like all of that was moving towards Jesus. And then, a couple hundred years after Abraham comes Moses. That's the giving of the law, the 10 Commandments. And not only did that continue to move forward, this pointing to Jesus, but it also was the means of bringing God's promise to Abraham into fruition. Here's what I mean. The law provided the curse under which Jesus had to die to fulfill the Abrahamic covenant. So, I say all that to say, the law and the old covenant, God's people, right, that's Abraham, and the law, obedience to the law, that's Moses, they can't be separated from each other. That's a part of Israel's history. And when you think about the law, it is the public evidence by which, and God says this, it's public evidence by which God convicts the world of sin. Now, okay, you've probably heard that before. Nobody was like, oh, because it sounds very churchy. Here's what I mean. If the Jews had the law, and they knew the law, and they couldn't do the law, you're like, well, they're hopeless. I mean, if Paul couldn't do it, if Paul, who was blameless to the law, Pharisee of Pharisees, said that Jesus came to save sinners, and of all the sinners, I'm the worst. I'm like, what do me as a Gentile who didn't grow up with the law, I got no shot at all. I'm toast. I mean, so what we see here is that all people are shown to be guilty even just through the Jews' experience with the law. So how in the world will any of us be able to keep God's law, or live in God's designed purpose for humanity, or even present ourselves righteous. I think that's what we're seeing here. Somebody whose life was built on the law, who then will go on to preach that the Mosaic law was just a shadow of what was to come. It was just a shadow of what was to come, a shadow of the heavenly reality that became real and incarnate in the person and in the work of Jesus Christ. It all came to a head in the one man, the God-man, that Saul encountered on this road in the middle of the day. One author says it very poetically, when the sun reaches noon, all shadows disappear. So when we look at verse 4-9, I just want to focus on three things. All right, I'm going to ask three quick questions just to help us understand what's going on, okay? Number one, who is this person? I will ask this. I'll let y'all answer because it's one of those Sunday school answers. Who is this person? Jesus. There you go. All right, good job. All right, Jesus. That's right. In verse 5, Jesus. Now, again, this story might seem familiar to us, but as we think about what Wes read earlier during worship, Ezekiel 1, Luke is intentionally trying to bring Ezekiel 1 into the minds of the readers. And if you think back to it in Ezekiel's vision, the heavens open, there's bright light all around, and he described, that was a long passage. And I even told Wes and Slade and some others, I was like, I really want us to read it, but it is really long. And that's kind of the point. Ezekiel spends a lot of time describing the creatures, describing the throne room, describing the light. And then when he gets to the very end, he only gives about 2.5 verses to this human that's sitting on the throne, which you're like, shouldn't that be the whole point? He says, the light was too bright. I couldn't see anything. But here, Saul looks up and sees Jesus, the I am, as the one on the throne. What Ezekiel couldn't see with clarity, Saul is now beholding. And Jesus said this, right? He said this in John 12. He was like, Isaiah wrote, like when he had that vision, he saw me. He wrote of me. He just didn't know it. And so, no wonder Saul, in a moment, he's on the ground quivering. No wonder he falls to the ground. Because he sees the risen, exalted one on the throne that he's heard all these visions about. It's the person who he hates more than anyone in the universe. In glory, reigning and ruling with all power. And that's when you see the flip. Like Saul, the manhunter, was now about to be captured by the one who he was hunting. And he hears these words from Jesus. What does he say in verse 4? He says, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? This is the second question I want to ask. So who is the person? It's Jesus. What was Saul doing to Jesus? Now you're like, Jesus in heaven. What could Saul do to him? Right? He says here he's persecuting him, both in verse 4 and in verse 5. And I think this is important because Jesus so identifies with his church here. This is more than just a metaphor of we're his body. That's cool. That's a really cool picture. But Jesus is actually identifying with his church here. Now, obviously, we know Jesus was already persecuted at the cross. He already died, and he rose, and he ascended to heaven, where he's ruling. But he so identifies with his people because what it says here, as Paul's persecuting the church, look in verse 4 and 5. He says, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He said, who are you, Lord? He said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. And so I was like, dude, you've been gone for a long time. I'm not coming after you. Maybe that's what's going through his head if he's getting all defensive. I don't know. But Jesus is so identifying with his people that when those who are united to him by faith are persecuting, it's almost like Jesus looks at those people who are being persecuted and says, those who persecute you are persecuting me. Those who hate my body, or to use another illustration, those who hate my bride, they got a problem with me. The killer Saul is now being stopped by the one who was killed, who he's seeking to continue to kill and persecute. I mean, when you think of the people around the world today being persecuted for the name of Jesus, obviously not many here in Hewitt, Texas. I get that. But it's foolish of us to think that we're the only Christians that exist. We got the best version of Christianity or whatever. Like, there are Christians around the world throughout all time that have been persecuted and had their lives lost, had friends, family members tortured before their eyes just because they believe in Jesus. I mean, we read this when we got to the end of Revelation, where like the martyrs are crying out like, how long, O Lord, will you delay? Avenge us. And Peter says that. He says, yeah, God is patient toward all, hoping that they would repent. But what we see here is those who are persecuting Christians around the world today are persecuting Christ himself. It's not just a beef between two humans. Like, this is a sin against God. It's a sin against God. We really need to understand what it means that Jesus identifies with his church. Now, again, we might not be persecuted here, but I think we need to think through how Jesus identifies with his church, because I think that actually does, impact how we as believers think about the church, right? I think there was a study that came out and said, and this isn't just people who claim to be Christians, like these are church-going Christians, right? Members of churches. On a given Sunday, maybe 75% are in attendance, right? So on any given Sunday, 25% of church members, like committed Bible reading, Bible believing, we are members of a church or committed to a church. 25% of them aren't there on any given Sunday. Now, obviously, people are sick or traveling. I get that. But that doesn't make up for a quarter of a church being absent. And I've thought about that too, because I'm going to be honest, it's just confession time from your pastor. There are some Sundays I don't really feel like coming to church, right? I'm not saying those days are a lot, but those days come. Some of it I'm tired. Some of it I got a migraine. Some of it I'm like, I'm not going to preach that sermon in front of people today. It's not ready. Some of it is like, man, I don't know. I just kind of want to stay home and chill. Or I don't want to see that person, whatever the reasons are. And I think when we think about Jesus identifying with his church, do we actually believe that like to gather with his body is to gather with him? That what God orchestrates here and what he commands for us to do here, when the writer of Hebrews says, don't neglect the gathering of yourselves for worship, but encourage one another as the day of the Lord draws near, are we like, yeah, I want to be, that's my whole struggle with a sabbatical coming up in the fall. I got 3 months off coming up, and a lot of pastors are saying, hey, don't go to your church on sabbatical. And I'm like, but I want to be with my people who are God's people who love me. Whether or not I come here, I will be at a church, but there's something in me that I'm like, I feel the tangible expression of God's love and grace through you in my life directly. Like when I miss church, I miss church. And I think that's because we see, like, Jesus identifies with his body. But we only get this when we have this, like, life-altering heart change that Saul has. And that brings us to the third question. So we saw, who was this man? What is he doing to Jesus? Now, what does Jesus do to him? Look at verse 8 and 9. Verse 8 and 9. Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were open, he saw nothing. So they led him, the men who were with him, that's verse 7. The men who were with him led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And for 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. So what does Jesus do to Saul? He blinds him. He takes away his sight. Now, Luke says in those 3 verses, he emphasizes like that he's blind or the consequence of his blindness 3 times in those 2 verses. So what he's trying to do, whenever the Bible repeats stuff, it's not like somebody like a filibuster who's just trying to find words and then eventually his next thought will come. No, he's very intentionally laying this out so that you're understanding what's going on. And so he's emphasizing this to give you license to read into the imagery of light and dark, of sight and blindness. Because this is a massive theme that won't just carry throughout the rest of Acts, but even in all of Paul's letters. I mean, in Acts, like as Paul's bringing the gospel to the Gentiles, it's described as like an image of light going forth and pushing back the darkness. It's interesting, like this picture of Saul blind in the middle of the day is a lot like Isaiah 59, where it says, we grope along the wall like the blind. We grope like those without eyes. We stumble at noon as if it were twilight. Why? Why does he go blind? Because though he was blind, he had seen Christ. And now that he could see Christ, he also saw himself for the first time. That whole life, that whole rap sheet that he's been building his entire life, he realizes, I am utterly wrong. I'm hopeless. I am a guilty criminal before God. I mean, he says to the church in Rome, he says, nothing good dwells in me. If you keep reading that Philippians 3, where he starts saying, as to the law, I was perfect, as to this, I was that, next verse. I count all of that nothing compared to knowing Christ and being known by him. As the way one author puts it is, as Christ's enemy, he had drawn blood, and now darkness was everywhere, especially within his own soul. The hunter had been hunted down, and there was no escape. I think that's the reality of what Saul had to have been experiencing at this moment. Now, just 2 quick takeaways and then we'll move on. What do we learn from this? The first is this, is Jesus Christ is always the initiator. He's always the initiator. He seeks and saves sinners today just as he did with Saul. I mean, think about like all of the grace that took on the preparation end from God. I mean, he exposed Saul, to Stephen, the courage, the faith. I mean, Paul had to have, maybe not walking home that day, but I'm thinking if he's laying in his bed or cot or whatever they slept in back then at night, running through his day, he had to have thought like, is there any chance this guy could be right? Like, who in the world would die for this? Unless he was absolutely convinced. But again, he's like, nah, that's crazy talk. Just kick that goat away, right? It had to have been somewhere in his brain. But the fact that God put him there to witness that, the first Christian martyr, that then the person taking out martyrs from city to city, then gets saved. I mean, and we see that when we see Ananias' story come in, is that God is always the initiator. And second, Jesus chooses to save and use sinners. He chooses to save and use sinners. He doesn't just initiate, bring us to our knees, get us to cry out, God, we're desperate, we need help. And then he's like, all right, good, glad you're there. See you later. He doesn't do that. I mean, he gives us an offer. Now, this is a very shortened version, and actually in the 2 different retellings we have, we're actually going to fill the story out more. So I'm not going to do that here, but it's clear that there is a conversion experience. right? I think this is where we need to see that if you feel, if you're not a Christian, whether you're a kid or an adult or whatever, if you have not yet believed in Jesus, there is this feeling that you have whenever you do something bad. And that is, it's called guilt, i.e. you are guilty. Maybe there's some shame there too with it, embarrassment. But you have guilt because you are guilty. And I would say that's a godly feeling. He put that in you on purpose. Now the question then is, do you go, well, maybe I can try to do enough good things to then make myself feel better? Or if there is a God, maybe I can just give a shot out there and just go, well, my goods outweigh my bads. Paul's like, no, I mean, even our good stuff is just utterly worthless. I count it as nothing. Or do you see that you have sinned against God? You see that Christ came and entered the world and took your sin and said to God, when he went to the cross, he was like, God, take all of your wrath and all of the punishment that Michael deserves for his sin and put it on me. Let me pay that price so he doesn't have to. And he did that for the world, so that anyone who calls on him will be saved. Anyone who believes in him. Anyone, even somebody who's trying to murder his people. Sorry, but you can bring whatever objection. I don't want to hear, yeah, but if he really knew. I'm like, he knows. And still says, come. I mean, that's the offer. Like if Saul can get it, I don't think, at least those of you guys I know, I don't think any of y'all are like a mass murderer. So Saul can get it. I mean, any of us can. Anyone can. There is no sin that is too great for Christ to save you from. And I'd say on the flip, like there is no one that's too good that doesn't need salvation. But there are also nobody too bad that salvation can't apply to. We have to understand where we're at and where Jesus is at. And not just he will save you and bring you in and go, okay, now go sit in the corner over there. You're lucky you got in. That's not at all the picture we see. I mean, in verse 15, Jesus actually tells Ananias, he is my chosen instrument. And this is what's wild, is that Saul's commissioned by the high priest in verse 1 and 2 to go kill Christians. But then now here, he's recommissioned by the great high priest to actually bring the light to those who don't yet know Jesus. And Saul previously obstructed the way of the Lord, and now he's commissioned to make a new way for the Lord. Now, this might confuse you. This might maybe seem unfair. Maybe if you're in the shoes of Saul, you think it's too good to be true. Maybe if you're in the shoes of Ananias, you're like, I don't like that. That's scandalous. Are you telling me, insert whatever celebrity you think is the most vile human on the face of the earth, and you go home today and you see so-and-so became a Christian, professes Jesus. Tell me that you're not going to say, And that's what happens here. All right? Let's look at the second paragraph, and then I'll wrap this up. So Saul isn't left or sent out alone, right? He's sent actually to finish his journey, go to Damascus, meet a man named Ananias, different than the one who got swallowed up with Sapphira, right? Ananias was just a common name. It meant God is gracious. And so Ananias was also given a vision of Jesus. And if you're watching this as a movie, I think of books a lot as movies. Everyone's like, the book's better. I'm like, I know it's better, but movies are quicker and I don't have to read. That's fine, but except the Bible. The Bible, book's always better, and yeah, anyways. All right. But if I'm seeing this as an episode, next, in Acts, Ananias gets a lot of screen time here. And you're like, why? because the dude never shows up again in the Bible. But yet, he's the one that's used as the instrument for probably the biggest conversion in all of Christianity. Why him? Well, number one, he authorizes Saul's conversion, right? He's a representative of Damascus, basically adding credibility. This isn't like Saul has a vision of Jesus and nobody gets to know about it or see it or hear it. You just got to take his word. And it's like, well, I mean, he was known as like a really dangerous dude. He could have been some charlatan going, hey, I'm a Christian now. Why don't you guys come over to my house for dinner? I would get that invite and go, If I do, I'm going to alert the authorities and have them around the corner. I'd be skeptical. And so he authorizes Saul's conversion. And again, that's not down to downplay the vision that Saul has of Jesus. It was historical. It was supernatural. But bringing Ananias into this actually functions to draw communities together and link Paul to the church, not just as some rogue missionary. All right? So it authorizes. And second, it demonstrates God's sovereignty. I mean, notice the story of Ananias and just the type of person he was and who Saul was, and how God masterfully weaves these stories together into this tapestry of salvation at the same time to accomplish his purposes. I've said this before. I'll probably say it forever until I get my schedule under control. It's hard enough for me to keep up a schedule for one individual, let alone 3 other people in my house. Oh, we have what day? And I can't keep all that up. And yet God is not just keeping up with what everyone's doing, but actually ordering and orchestrating every single thing that happens in everyone's lives. Just as we saw last week with Philip and the Ethiopian eunuch crossing at the same time, we see here. So the Spirit's work isn't limited to just one individual, but it's continuously uniting people and even opposing people. And thirdly, why Ananias? Doesn't just authorize Saul's conversion, doesn't just demonstrate God's sovereignty, but it also shows a genuine, real fear that needs to be overcome. I mean, yes, he's a messenger, but he's also more than a messenger. I mean, this Ananias pictures how hard reconciliation can be. If those of y'all who don't think reconciliation's hard, I'm like, just wait. Those of us who have been hurt deep enough, hard enough, or been scared, strong enough, you know how hard it is. And if you've asked the question, what's the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation? You probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Because you're like, I'll forgive the guy. I don't trust him. I mean, it's real. I mean, he's the type of people Saul was killing. I don't know, maybe Ananias was on Paul's Damascus list. Remember, he's going there to kill Christians. Or maybe someone he loves has been ripped from his home, or one of his friends had been murdered when they were on a trip to Jerusalem. I don't know. But yet, when God appears, and he says, Ananias, verse 10, here I am, Lord. Ready, willing. Here I am. That's how, when you read the Old Testament, that's typically how the interaction goes. And God uses him not only to heal Saul, but also confirm his faith. Meaning that the fear that he has is overcome by the power of the gospel. I mean, and Ananias stands as a symbol of those who might doubt the radical work of God upon somebody that you would least expect to repent. So he says, go to Judas's house. It's on Straight Street, which is interesting because God's bringing this very crooked killer with this terrified guy, bringing these paths together on a street called Straight. Kind of cool. Ananias is rightfully nervous. Kind of. right? Kind of trusting, kind of nervous, kind of, like I'm trying to grasp God. Like I know God can save, but like it is hard to understand how some people can get saved. And then maybe that's not a struggle. Maybe a struggle is more like, okay, I believe God can save people, but like, what do you think everyone else in the church is going to say when I bring Paul to community group next week? I mean, legitimate question, right? And so God just responds with his plan. He says, look, he's seen a vision. This is what's going to happen. I've chosen him to be my instrument. And Ananias is like, all right. If he is the one, like Abraham, to bless the world, if he is the one like Jeremiah to be a prophet to the nations, he obeys. Despite the danger, he obeys. Just like Abraham, just like Moses, just like, the list goes on. He had to have feared for his life, but he listened and he went. And this is what's wild. When you look at this, he doesn't just listen and obey God going, okay, I know you said do this. I'll do it. Like kind of like a Jonah thing, right? Remember Jonah? He was like, I don't want to go to Nineveh. Goes the other way. And then just maybe me reading into it, but I think he kind of preaches in a way where he's like, all right, God, I did it. Now let me die. I don't want to see them repent. That's not what's happening here. He actually extends God's grace and welcomes Saul as Jesus welcomed us. Imagine the fear. Like, what is going through his head? Is this all a ruse? Is this a trick? Is this a setup? Do I need backup? Even the hurt. What did he do to my friends, my family members? And then think about it even from Saul's perspective. This is more like probably more nervous and awkward than like a blind first date, because Paul's coming in having been blinded, having been saved by God, going, Ananias has to know who I am. I hope he doesn't bring up the past. I hope he doesn't press charges, or worse, try to take vengeance. I can't see. How am I going to defend myself? He could be waiting with an army there to take me out. And this is, I think, the climax and the most beautiful part of this passage. Look at verse 17. Ananias departed, entered the house, and laying his hands on him, he said, Brother Saul. It had to leave Saul speechless. It had to. And when you understand all that's going on, and then the first thing out of his mouth, he gets near enough to touch him and calls him brother. That is, I think, the beauty of the passage. It's not like, yes, it's amazing. God can save Saul. I've heard this story a ton growing up in church, so I'm going to be honest, it didn't blow my mind this week when I was studying it. It should. That's on me. But I've heard it enough. I'm like, yeah, I know God can save anyone. But I think what really got me this week, and what I want to leave with you, is not just that anyone can be saved, but that when God lets you in, he has a chair at the table with your name on it, and will call you son or daughter. And Jesus or Ananias or even Saul will look at you and call you brother or sister. So maybe you're not a Christian and you're like, I don't know. Again, just take Saul as a case study. Maybe you are a Christian and either someone you love isn't a Christian, you're starting to be hopeless, or someone you don't love just became a Christian. And you're like, what in the world? I think this passage is for all of us. It should give all of us hope today that not only can God save anyone, but he loves saving sinners. Genuinely loves saving sinners. And then he unites us together, no matter how different. Like, this is the mind-blowing, beautiful reality of this. As we sang earlier, people from every tribe, language, nation, tongue coming together for worship. Like, the picture we have here, just as we saw Stephen prayed for Saul's conversion, God answered that, and now they're in glory together, existing in harmony. Ananias, and we'll see it later in a couple weeks. Barnabas, when all the apostles are like, I don't know about this whole Saul guy, Barnabas says, let's go. We're on the same team now. That God would take people from all these different backgrounds with all these different stories, put them together in a way that makes people scratch their heads going, what in the world are they doing together on the same team? How do you two know each other? It's like literally the only thing we got in common is the gospel. And that is a powerful witness as they go forward and preach this gospel that can raise the dead, unite the enemies, and give everlasting life to those of us who are blind and need our eyes opened.